Landlords, you've got to do property inspections and you've got to do them regularly. So here are 3 really big reasons why you need to do them. Plus a little tip at the end to help you get them done properly. Number 1 is a property inspection is a good opportunity to check that the property, the tenancy and the tenant and you as a landlord is fully compliant with current legislation. Number 2, it gives you the chance to see if the property is hazard free and complies with the housing health and safety rating system. And that is more important now than it's ever been. You can get into some serious trouble if your property is not compliant with the HHSRS. And number 3, it lets you check that the people on the tenancy are the actual people living in the property. And I've got a story for you on that coming up in a minute. It's very, very serious, but it's often overlooked or missed, innocently or on purpose. So, number 1, is you've got to go and check that your property, the tenancy, you as a landlord and the tenants are fully compliant with up-to-date legislation. Legislation is constantly changing and new legislation is coming in all the time. So you as a landlord have to stay on top of that. It's your job to make sure that you know all of the compliance, all of the legislation, all of the processes and all of the standards that have to be met at all times. And here's a quick hint. There's around 176 different pieces of legislation that you as a landlord should know, especially if you're a self-managing landlord. I don't know why you would want to be a self-managing landlord. Maybe you think you're saving a few quid here and there. Maybe you think that you can do it, so you should do it. I don't know. That's up to you. But I would say that if you're going to be a self-managing landlord, a DIY landlord, then you must make sure you follow all of the compliance, all of the legislation, all of the procedures and laws to the letter to make sure that you don't get into trouble. It's more important now than it's ever been. So use a property inspection to check up on all of the compliance to make sure that you are compliant with current legislation. Number 2 is use the property inspection to check that the property is hazard free. Now that sounds really obvious. You're sat in your home and you think, yeah, I refurbished it a year ago. Of course it's hazard free. Or maybe there are things that are now categorized or classified as hazards that you didn't know are classified as hazards. There is such thing called the Housing Health and Safety Rating System, and it is so important. It is really serious. The HHSRS itself shows 29 ways that the tenant can actually sue you for things and hazards that you didn't even know were hazards. So I'd suggest go and check out the Housing Health and Safety Rating System. Go and check out the HHSRS and make sure that you know all of your properties, or even if you've just got one property, all of them comply with the HHSRS. If they don't, or if something has happened since you last went to the property, then you're going to get fined. Or even worse, the tenant can sue you. Now, tenants can sue landlords directly and the HHSRS is contributing towards that. Number 3, and by the way, make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel. Just do it now, I'll wait for you, but subscribe to the channel so that you can watch other videos which contain information, updates, advice, and tips about being a modern landlord, a compliant landlord, and an anonymous landlord. So hit the subscribe button now, and if you like this video, please give it a like as well. Comment below if you've got any experiences that are relevant and would help other people as well. So number 3, this one's often overlooked or missed. Sometimes on purpose, sometimes by accident. But check that all of the people that are living in that property are on your tenancy. There's a little story about, I'm just going to call them Mr. and Mrs. Smith because I don't want to give away any names. A landlord moved Mr. and Mrs. Smith and their 1-year-old son into a property. Mr. and Mrs. Smith decided to go away for 6 months back to their home country. In that time, they moved somebody else into the property. I know. They moved somebody else into the property and thought nothing of it. Just thought, well, they can pay the rent while we're back home in our home country for 6 months. Now, I'm not going to go into the reasons. Let's not worry about that. But this is just the story to help you understand the seriousness. So they've gone back to their home country, and new tenant, let's just call him Mr. Jones, has moved into the property. It turns out Mr. Jones does not have the right to reside in this country, and therefore the landlord was fined £15,000. Unbelievable. Didn't even know, had no clue whatsoever. Look, that's quite serious, but it can be as innocent as Mr. and Mrs. Smith move Mrs. Daniels into the property just to lodge from them and pay some of the rent because they're struggling with their bills. It might just be that they moved their friend in for 6 months. It might just be they've moved somewhere else and let it to a family member or a friend and you don't even know about it. As long as you're getting your rent, you've not been to the property in a year or 2 years or more. You're getting your rent. You don't know, you don't mind, leave it alone. You've got to check that every person living in the property is on the tenancy. Now, of course, if you moved that person in and you go to the property and you see it's Mr. and Mrs. Smith and their child is now 3, then don't worry. But you've got to ask the question, is anybody else living here with you? That's really important. You also start breaching HMO rules, houses of multiple occupancy. If you've got more people than are allowed to live in that property, then you could be in trouble with HMO rules and guidelines. So check that the people living in the property are the people on the tenancy. If they're not, take action quickly because it's very, very serious. So I promised you a little tip about getting property inspections done correctly. I'm actually going to give you 2. I know I'm so generous, unbelievable. I do all this for free. The reason I do all of this, by the way, is in the hope that at some point you, Mr. and Mrs. Landlord, would want to use my letting agency. Now, my letting agency are based and cover the majority of the South Coast. So if you are down that way, then please do contact me and my team will help you let, manage, or both your property and find you good tenants. That's what we do. So that's why I do all of this. If you're not going to be a customer of mine, I want to make sure that you get it right. If you are going to be a customer of mine, great. We'll work together and that'll be awesome. The first tip that I'm going to give you is to make sure that you arrange the property inspection correctly. There is a procedure to follow. For an example, you've got to give the tenant 24 hours notice minimum. Don't just turn up. Even if it's turning up, knocking the door, don't do that. The tenant could start talking about harassment. You don't want that. It's pretty serious. Definitely don't let yourself in. That's pretty serious too, especially if the tenant hasn't given you permission to do so. So when you arrange the property inspection, make sure you record or keep or screenshot all of the communications that you have with the tenant. For an example, all the arrangements that you make, just screenshot it on your phone and print it out and keep hold of it in the file. That's really important. Tip number 2 is not to call it an inspection, or certainly not to treat it like an inspection. I know that sounds a bit odd because of all of the things I've just told you about why you must do property inspections. What I mean by that is start thinking of it as an opportunity to make sure that you're compliant, to make sure that your tenants are safe and comfortable and happy. That sounds really weird, I know, because there are some landlords out there that are money grabbers, that are purely trying to do everything as cheaply as possible so that they can just get the rent every month. But actually, I think most landlords want their tenants to be comfortable. If you're a smart landlord, then actually you want your tenant to be comfortable and happy and safe, because then they'll be there long term. And if a tenant is comfortable and happy and safe and they're living in a good property which is compliant for them and their families, then they're also more likely to pay a fair market value of rent. So make sure that you are not treating them like a checkup on the way someone's living. You're not there to judge how somebody lives. If someone's a bit messy, if they don't have the same things as you, if they don't live the same way as you, it's nothing to do with you. Actually, as long as they're looking after the property and they're paying their rent, and the tenancy, the tenants, and you as a landlord and the property are compliant with current legislation, then don't worry about the way they live. Maybe they don't do the washing up of an evening. Maybe they leave their clothes on the floor in the bedroom. Don't worry. As long as they look after the property itself, as long as they pay their rent, as long as they are compliant and they allow you to be compliant, then don't worry about the way they live. I'm actually going to throw in a third tip here, which is a complete surprise. So those of you that have made it to the end of this video, you are in for a treat. No, not really. I'm just going to say that when you're at your property inspection, ask the tenant for their opinion and their feedback and their input. Ask them if there's anything they think needs repairing, if there are any problems with the property that you should know about, if the tenant is having any difficulty that you should know about. It's your job as a landlord to make sure that, yes, the tenant's looking after the property, yes, they're paying their rent, but also, as I said just now, your job as a landlord is to make sure that you're providing a good quality home for long-term, comfortable, safe and happy tenants. So ask the tenant, ask directly what will make you safer, happier and more comfortable. Now, if the tenant says reduce the rent, all right, that's for you to decide. But I would always value the tenant's input because they're the ones living in the property. So I hope that helps. Now look, I said earlier on, subscribe to this YouTube channel. If you're watching this on another platform, go over to my YouTube channel. I'll put the link in the comments and the description. If you can't find it there, then just go over to YouTube and search for Tom Soane. That's me. And you'll find me. There's 250 something videos on there at the moment, and it's growing every single week. I'm putting a couple on there. So go and check out the YouTube channel, subscribe to the YouTube channel. And if you want to contact me and my lettings team, you can email me direct. It's tom@soanegroup.co.uk. I'm going to go before this rubbish truck comes and interrupts everything. Take care, everyone. Goodbye.